On the evening of June the 19th, 1978, John and Gloria Mann and daughters Natasha 5 and Tanya 3 and John's sister Frances were travelling home to Gloucester in southwest England. Shortly after passing a village called Stamford in the Vale, they noticed a bright light in the sky that appeared to be following their car. John decided to stop the car near a hedge, but as he got out of the car, the light had vanished. But suddenly, a huge bowl-shaped craft appeared directly in front of the car, before slowly moving to the right and sinking down below the trees, but not before seeing a line of coloured lights along the rim of the object. His wife and sister also observed the same lights. They then heard a strange swishing sound and watched the craft move up and down a few times as if it had difficulty in landing. Fearful, John jumped back into the car and quickly drove off. But things got even stranger when the road, which they had driven on many times, looked unfamiliar. It appeared narrower and was flanked by tall hedges at certain points where there should have been broad views of the countryside. All of the adults were feeling uneasy, and there was no possibility that they'd driven down the wrong road, as there was no turn-off on that stretch of road. Their journey on the hedged-in roads seemed endless, and certain parts seemed to repeat themselves, and the road that should have been straight and flat was now curved and undulated. They had the sensation that they were floating and were in a dreamlike state, and if he let go of the steering wheel and took his foot off the accelerator, the car would move by itself. As this was taking place, the light in the sky continued to follow them. Eventually, they reached the town of Farringdon, and the light in the sky vanished. But the moment they continued their journey on the open road, the light reappeared. But after passing through the town of Cirencester, the light vanished. They arrived home an hour later than they should have. John called the RAF to ask whether there were any experimental aircraft flying around, and after extensive checks, they found nothing. After Frances went home, John and Gloria went straight to bed feeling unwell, but they were awoken an hour later by the same swishing sound that the UFO had made. Over the following days, both John and Gloria suffered from unexplained itching, and all three adults found strange marks on their bodies, like sharply defined bruises, but they were not painful. 1 week after the incident, John was in bed with the flu and had weird dreams where he was entering a flying saucer. In the dreams, he and the others had stepped out of the car onto a sloping beam that led to a doorway onto the side of a craft. They were walking along a corridor with curved walls. John then entered a room off of the corridor, and the women and children entered another room. The room had electronic instruments that covered the walls, and in the middle of the room was what looked to be a black dentist chair. He was told telepathically to sit on the chair, where they restrained his legs. Then a thin beam of light came out of the panel and scanned his body. After that, he was released from the chair and returned to the corridor and went up with the others, where they walked out of the craft and back to the car. A few days later, his sister had a similar dream where she had observed aliens watching them as they entered the craft, and they were wearing tight-fitting silver outfits. Their daughter, Natasha, also had dreams where she's been examined by silver-clad aliens with funny eyes, but also had waking recollections of what had happened. She said as they were leaving the craft, they were given a fizzy drink, which they said would help them forget their experience, but she would not drink it. Natasha said that a lady in a gold suit fetched them from the car and had also turned off the car's engine and the lights. She said the UFO had retractable legs, which went up into the spaceship in a lift. Inside the craft, she saw a huge screen that showed the road and their car below them. She described a room full of aliens of both sexes. They all sat down and were gripped in the middle by a safety belt and had the sensation of the spaceship taken off. She said that a woman called Achilles had taken her into a room and showed her a video of the flying saucer they were in. The film showed the saucer landing on several other planets where there were monsters, huge naked hairy men who were covered in mud and lived with their families in caves and sleeping on straw mattresses. She's seen 4 types of monsters, and the names were Saunuses, Vanissons, Gaines, and Fusentiuses. When she drew them, they all looked humanoid. The first three were unfriendly, but the last, the Frusciantiuses, looked like the classic little green men. UFO investigator Frank Johnson suggested they undergo regressive hypnosis. Whilst under, Francis, John and Natasha were all consistent in their recollections of their abduction and what really happened. After their car stopped, it was surrounded by mist. As the spaceship appeared, several figures in silver suits surrounded the car. As they got out of the car, a beam of light shone down from the spaceship above. As they stood in the light, the beam floated them up to the ship. Natasha looked down and saw one of the aliens turn off the car's engine and lights. They floated into the craft through a hatch and found themselves in a large circular room about 150 feet in diameter. An alien led them to a moving ramp that led up to a balcony where there were 4 silver-suited men. They were then welcomed and told they would all be examined to see whether Earthlings were the same as them, and afterwards they would answer any questions. After a tour of the ship, they would be escorted back to their car, and everything would seem as if it had never stopped driving. After the introduction, the adults were taken into a separate room while the children remained with their mother. Like John, Frances found herself in a room with what looked like a dentist's chair. She was told telepathically to sit down and would not be harmed. She was then thrust back into the chair before being dazzled by a bright light. She started to panic before a soothing image helped her relax. She noticed 2 thin silver-suited men who attended to instruments around the wall. They were about 6 feet tall, with blue eyes and short blonde hair. After being in the chair for about 20 minutes, she was told that there was not much difference between them except that the human pulse rate was higher, but that was probably due to being abducted. The aliens said that if they had lived on our planet, their pulse rate would possibly adjust over time. When Frances left the examination room, she met a bald alien around 2 inches taller than the others. The alien took her to what looked like a cafe where there were about 20 aliens sitting around drinking. An alien by the name of Uxwalia introduced himself to her and said he was a pilot from Janos that was about 7,000 light years away, but the journey only took them about 2 Earth years. He then showed her a film about people dying from radiation sickness on his planet Janos and how the planet was destroyed. He showed her stills and films of children playing and women wearing colourful clothing. People were boating on a lake and picnicking together. Frances was intrigued by the strange-looking fruit and vegetables, and that they ate very little meat. He said that advanced technology where cars floated above ground. Their ships were powered by static electricity, and coming to Earth was like going back in time. He then returned her to the family. She noticed that the furniture was bolted down and watched as the aliens tapped out instruments on buttons. John had been accompanied by an alien called Anuxia, who was some kind of leader, but was not actually in charge as the ship was run by a computer. Anuxia was about 6 feet tall with blue eyes and short blonde hair. Then 2 silver-clad female aliens entered who were about 5'3". Their skin was soft and young-looking. They wore flimsy silver helmets, and most of the aliens wore round badges on their chests. Their names were Sicilius and Consentia. They said their purpose for the visit was whether they could adapt to life on Earth and had planned to settle here permanently. He heard them speaking to each other in an incomprehensible language. He was then taken on a tour of the ship, where he was escorted to a deck. He saw a huge rotor and was told that if it spun fast enough, it acted as an anti-gravity machine where it generated enough electricity at an extremely high voltage. John believed their ship operated on nothing more than a huge Van de Graaff generator. John was given a tour of the engine full of wires and monitors. He was shown the navigation room that contained a horse-shaped disc that controlled the ship. John asked Anuxia where they came from, and it showed John their journey in reverse. Starting from Earth, they shot out through the solar system until they reached their planet called Janos that had 2 moons. He told John about the destruction of that planet and how it had once been green and fertile. Their people were now in underground chambers, looking disfigured and some dying. He was taken back to his family, where Anuxia said that they would meet again. They were then offered a drink to help them forget their experience, because if they remembered everything, it would put the aliens in danger. They were told they would remember nothing and would return to their car.